When we picture ancient India, we usually imagine sprawling empires, massive stone temples, and wealthy kings holding absolute power over millions of subjects. But if we look back to the early Vedic age, between 1500 and 1000 BCE, that image disappears. We find a foundational era with no capital cities, no permanent borders, and no written laws. This era represents the start of one of history's most complex civilizations, yet it began in a society that functioned entirely on tribal consensus and cattle. Our understanding comes from the Rigveda. This is the oldest of the Shruti, the herd literature. These texts were passed down orally through a precise system of memorization for centuries before they were ever recorded in writing. These texts describe a specific setting, the Sapta Sindhu, or the land of the seven rivers. This was a rugged, open environment in the northwest, where survival depended on moving with the seasons. To see the actual roots of Indian civilization, we have to look past modern definitions of power and wealth and examine how these early tribes organized themselves. One common assumption is that ancient rulers were dictators who held total, unquestioned control over their people. The reality is that the early Vedic king, or Rajan, was primarily a Gopati, a protector of the tribe's cattle. He didn't claim ownership of the land, nor did he have the power to rule by decree. Power resided in three tribal assemblies, the Sabha, Samiti, and ancient Vedas. The Rajan couldn't make major decisions without their support. Historical records show women actively participated in these assemblies, contributing to discussions on tribal life and communal decisions. Even the concept of taxation, known as Bali, was different. It wasn't a mandatory seizure of property, but a voluntary contribution used for the collective security of the tribe and for ritual ceremonies. This model of governance suggests that early Vedic society maintained social order through tribal cooperation and shared interests, rather than a centralized, coercive state. We also tend to assume that ancient wealth was defined by vast territorial maps and vaults of gold. Because this was a semi-nomadic society, private land was useless. You couldn't take a field with you. Instead, the most valued currency was cattle. This is reflected in their language. The word for war was gavisti, which literally means the search for cows. Battles were fought to acquire livestock, not to annex territory. Trade worked on a simple barter system. Without coins or permanent trade routes, wealth was measured by what was tangible and living. Their entire economy was fluid and tied directly to the natural environment, rather than artificial boundaries or fixed assets. There is also a common belief that Vedic society was always defined by a birth-based caste system and centered around massive temples. While the four Varnas existed, they were not yet rigid. At this stage, your classification was based on your occupation and capability. A person's role in society was tied to their merit, not their lineage. Their religion also lacked idols or permanent structures. They performed yagnas, fire sacrifices, in open clearings, using mantras to make offerings directly to the elements. Their primary deities, like Indra and Agni, were personifications of nature. People petitioned them for practical needs, like rain for their crops, healthy livestock, and success in conflict. This religious and social structure was designed for the practicalities of a nomadic life, providing a way to organize a society that was constantly on the move. This flexible, consensus-based structure changed as the population grew, and tribes began to settle in one place. This transition into the Smriti era was driven by the expansion of agriculture. Managing large, permanent farms required a more complex form of administration and labor. As society became stationary, the social structure hardened. The Varna system shifted from a merit-based classification into a rigid, birth-based caste hierarchy. Politics changed as well. Women were gradually excluded from assemblies, voluntary contributions became mandatory taxes, and the Rajan transformed into a territorial monarch. The shift from seasonal movement to permanent agriculture brought with it the practical demands of a settled state, which gradually replaced the social equality of the earlier era. The records of the early Vedic age show that the foundations of Indian governance were built on tribal consensus rather than centralized absolute rule. This was a society organized around the ability to adapt to a changing environment, the use of communal decision-making, and a direct reliance on the natural world. These early methods of organization provided the necessary framework for the larger states and more complex political systems that would develop centuries later. Long before the construction of permanent stone monuments, the organizational logic of the tribe established the template for the civilization that followed.